Doc is a founding member of the Association for Manufacturing Excellence, which he edited for 22 years. He's a huge fan of lean, has written many lean books and articles. 1992, he wrote a book which I just realized I read. I didn't realize it was him at the time, The Soul of the Enterprise. And he says that led to an unending book, which is his most recent, called Compression, which he contends we need a major shift in business and economic practices. And that is our challenge for the 21st century. In fact, it was Doc's notion of the vigorous learning enterprise that led me to create the Gensler University program. He is currently the chairman of the Compression Institute, and I would like to ask you to help me give him a very warm hand as a welcome.
Well, thank you all, and I'm going to ramble. I don't give presentations, I just talk. And so if you interrupt me, that's okay. If I don't finish all the slides, that's okay. Let's just get a conversation going. So I don't know what title to even put on this, but let's call it The Illusion That We're Rational. And take off from Peter Marks. Thank you much, Peter, for all this, beginning this stuff on blind spotting. I've heard it called different things. But blind spotting, we're unable to see what we look at for various reasons. We compare it with what we already know and it doesn't fit, so we ignore it. And there are a lot of physiology things about how we select what we look at and so on, strictly physical, and then there are others that come from mental models and so on. But down at the bottom of that, we get out of the behavioral part. Everybody has seen these things, and I remember Peter's presentation. He had a whole screen full of these things. We keep talking. We filter. While we're listening to somebody else, we're thinking what we're going to do for a retort or response. We selectively pick the evidence. We warp the map. We make it look our way. What do we want to do? We want to win. What if there ain't no winning? And when you win, you lose. Shoot all the winners. Start over. Think differently. That little thing I took from a door I saw in Vancouver, Canada. That was the message. We all have contradictions in what we, quote, believe. When we run out of evidence, if we even look at it, we come up with a story to explain what we believe. If we don't have facts, we may even invent them. And so an awful lot of what scientists decry as just so stories are explanations. Your 5-year-old asks you to explain something. What do you tell them? Maybe a little story. It may be not quite true, but it's what they can understand at the time. Maybe. Shuts them up anyway. And so, how do we know if we're rational or just rationalizing? True story, I taught in the School of Business. I was the wart on the nose of progress for a long time in the School of Business. So, remember this wonderful case we had on Reliance Electric from Harvard. Had a bunch of guys in the class, MBA class in the evening, that were from Reliance. So this was a big plant location study. You go through all the rigmarole. Maybe a lot of you have been through this, you know, all the factors you study and you line it all up, and here's the one you pick. Okay? Took about 5 minutes into this, and the ones from Reliance understood why was the case writer from a place like Harvard so stupid. Everybody in Reliance knew what the decision was going to be. The rest of it would just cover. The vice president in charge of this was from Athens, Georgia. He was a big University of Georgia fan. He did not want to be very far from any football or basketball game. The rest of it was just a cover to make that decision. Has anybody been through that? You can all think of more stories like that. They're in, we'll talk about rationality, but maybe we're just covering. Maybe the whole system right now is just covering. I got this from Jerry Edelman, one of his books. This is an old thing, goes back to the 19th century, but it's based on, engrams, how the brain learns and changes. As we get older, learning requires unlearning. I don't like to do that either, because we're having to get rid of something we already know and reposition something that's not in accordance with our accepted belief system, how things work. That takes some time. So you watch people go through this, and you can read that for yourself. It's kind of, if you're in the corporate world or anywhere else, how do people go through a learning process when it takes a big change from what they currently think, believe, or do? Down at the end, once they buy off, they can't admit they were ever any other way. Try to keep our internal system of logic. At least we can make an excuse to ourselves that it is. And when we are that way, we're in a situation much like, geometry was, almost a couple hundred years ago. Planar, Euclidean geometry. Got all the rules, got it down pat, man. Two parallel lines never meet. Got it. Let's go on. Now then, suppose it's spherical or you got some other kind of geometry to deal with, and all of a sudden, I don't know how many different kinds of geometry there are now. A bunch, more than I know about. And I'm not sure I even want to know about them, but there's a lot. And so the world does not look at all the same as it did to the old Greek geometry champions. We've come a long way. Now, what for, I'm not sure. But the thought opened up a great deal. And why'd they do that? They opened their mind to a lot of possibilities other than flat, straight line surfaces. Can we do that? I don't know. A lot of learning is emotional. A lot of us can't understand anything because we're going to lose money if we do. You can pay yourself an awful lot of money to not understand something. And you can probably see that in the corporate world a good deal. Give you a simple example. Maybe too much background, but take the selling of cleaning chemicals and how it usually works. You got a purchasing manager that's measured on purchase price variance. You got a salesman that's measured on commission. They get rewards in dollars. Collectively, what do they want to do? Well, buy quite a bit of that stuff within the buyer's budget. Make it look like you got a big beat up on price, so the purchasing manager gets a reward, the salesman gets a commission, everybody is happy, but what did they do? Oversupply the company with cleaning chemicals, which are going to go down the sewer, blah, blah, blah. The system is rigged, and it's rigged for growth. And it's not just in the big GNP way, it's in a lot of little rules that we take for granted every day. This is how it works. Changing that is emotional. I don't know, maybe a few of you follow Jeff DeGraff, but one of his recent blogs had this significant quote. Well, I don't know, about 500 to 1,000 different comments. Right on, Jeff. Jeff's a well-known proponent of innovation. You will never make way for the new, the deviant, the subversive, until what? You are willing to let go of that for which you have spent your whole career creating. The old has to die, and that is the tough part. I'm not very young, and I still don't want to die. So this is no simple thing. Probably the emotional learning is the hardest part. This is too fancy. I'm going to flick through a bunch of this. Anyway, we've got a real mess. This is the way I describe it. Global warming, whatever that is just one piece. I'll tell you one I'm chasing right now, which is the connection between drought and flood, endocrine disruptors, and a few other things. It's Roundup and glyphosate. I can't pronounce that very well. The active ingredient. Got a bunch of that. This spring, people seem to be putting it on the field where I am in record amounts. Why? Because you can kill the weeds. But when you do, you get GM-modified crops that do not uptake metals in small quantity, micronutrient. So the crops you eat don't have that in there. That has some effect on what happens to you when you eat them. But that may not be the significant part. What does that do to the microbes in the soil over a period of time? So this is a major one. I don't want to talk about it too much. I'm just chasing that one. But this one, before this crop season is out, could be a pretty major thing to do. So we're not talking about just global warming with everything else remaining constant. Economists love this term ceteris paribus, all other things remaining equal. Ceteris never stays at paribus. There are a lot of things going on at once, and we're not used to thinking that way. And so, where it says soil degradation, maybe we got a much bigger problem than we thought, and one that we have begun to create ourselves. That three-circle diagram I think everybody's familiar with. The one I like is over on the right-hand side. Talk about a huge change. In a company, what do we have to think about first? At least stay insolvent. Even if you're a school or a nonprofit or a church in a transactional society, you got to take in at least as much money as you spend because that's the way it works. If we're going to do something substantially different, can we do it and still have a system that works that way? What does it constrain you to do? So, I'm going to shut up. What kind of a problem we really have? You can run down that list. Technological? Is it scientific? We got quite a bit in place there, or we can get it in place. Institutional, structural, like Ken and I were talking. How does the system work? And are we bound by it? Frozen in it? Economic? And what about basic values? The stuff that we believe and practice when nobody else is looking or that we feel constrained to do. Ask some questions. So, good question. As you try to figure out what innovation really is, and your definition, what assumptions are we making? Because when you answer that question and you think more, reflect on your own assumption. What am I assuming? And from a viewpoint of an entrepreneur, it's not an innovation until I capture market and people do something different. So I'd like to explore that question as we go on. In this context, what does innovation really mean?